Well, certainly 400 people have gone away edified, but isn't that a fair question? That is to say, should one despair of the possibility of actually having a discourse with folks with whom disagreements are so fundamental that you would say talk is going to be futile?
I'm not even sure discourse, between sides is the thing. We simply have to understand more about the phenomenon and look it straight in the face. I have to say that on this question of what contemporary Europe is like, I side a little more with Christopher than with Noah here. That although I'm for a plan B that tries to encourage things within the Muslim world that will moderate it, I think at the same time, in fact, part of the motivation is looking at the real gaps and conflicts that are there in Europe now. That does have to be faced, but it has to be faced not through a gesture and not through a rhetorical gesture that makes us feel that yet again we have a bunker to go into and yet again we have a fight to fight, but that we actually understand the sociology of the situation, where the flashpoints are, exactly what people believe, and how malleable they are.
Okay. Next question.
Mr. Hitchens, is there any way in which this connotation can express itself besides the military one? Or is that how it can look only?
Oh, look, I had a friend, last now dead, Professor Israel Shahak was his name. He was a professor of chemistry at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem and chairman of the Israeli League for Human and Civil Rights. And he thought the main problem in Israel was the main fault line was the struggle between the secular and the Haredim, the Orthodox. And that this was also the key to it was that would be the key to the solution with the Palestinians also. And I used to ring him up when I didn't go visit him. I'd ring him and say, and how are things going with this struggle? And he would say, well, there are some encouraging signs of polarization. And I remember thinking how very nice that was, because in a culture like ours, it's saturated with the idea that if you're a unifier, whatever garbage you're talking is okay. And if you want to say something critical or awkward, you can be accused of being divisive, which must be, by definition, horrible. But someone would say, no, excuse me, the only progress that's made, this is an answer to the previous gentleman's question as well, in any argument or any discussion is by confrontation. That's a dialectical fact. People say, oh, let's have less heat and more light, fatuously. There is only one source of light. It happens to be heat.
Now there is an empathy.
So I'm not much use to you in a military confrontation, though I'd be willing to bear arms on this. That's not what it's going to hinge on. I want people to make as sharp as possible a distinction between themselves and creeping soft theocratization of their society, and the ones who make excuses for it. I want this to become a much tougher, harder argument.
Okay, let's have one
to do my bit in that way.
One last question.
I have a question about the internet and technology and the sort of flattening of the world. I mean, do you think that our ability to understand each other, to have an awareness, more cross-cultural awareness, religious awareness cross-culturally, is ultimately going to lead to more understanding or to more divisiveness?
Is that a question which any of you
Well, the premise of the question seems to be that changes in technology are helping us to confront each other and understand each other, and I reject the premise. Rather, it gives us a superficial sense of understanding something if we can click on a mouse and see a website, and I think lessens the sense of the real cultural and intellectual divides between cultures or nations that are based on a political theology and those that are not. So on the contrary, I worry that we know less because of all this.
All right, I guess we have time for one more, in fact.
Or as T.S. Eliot says, it's in Choruses from the Rock, where is the knowledge we've lost in information?
Thanks. Can you talk a bit more about how religion and the discussion of religion can be used as a mask for more social problems, such as immigration in France and poverty in Turkey and the military coups that have been going on there for the latter half of the 20th century, and how maybe talking about religion is not always the solution to the problem, but rather a way to avoid talking about the...
Well, I think I agree with that in part. I mean, take the riots in France a couple of summers ago. many efforts were made, especially outside of France, by people to say, you see, this is young Muslim men rioting, here comes the clash. But in fact, what was notable about it is that for all of the rioting, the discontent, the bad behavior, and the state's slow reaction to it, there was no successful consolidation of anything Islamic about it. The fundamentalists had no impact on the rioters. It turned out to be a rather familiar form of disenfranchised poor people, angry and rioting to no great end, as these things tend to be. And I think that's an example that shows you in part that to say, there are Muslims in France who are angry, or that there's crime associated with Muslim areas has got in some ways little to do with the particular religious beliefs or the content of the religious beliefs of the people who are angry. That's just one example of that phenomenon I think you're talking about.
Au contraire. In an almost apotropaic way, these were invariably written up, especially in the New York Times, as protest by disillusioned and demoralized youth. Right? The suggestion being maybe there aren't enough sports clubs in their neighborhood and all this kind of thing. Well, I have two questions.
I think it's more about the jobs.
Yeah, and maybe unemployment too. So naturally, if you're unemployed, why not go and set fire to a lot of cars? That'll get you a job. Now, if it's youth, I have two questions for you. Why were there no girls? Exclusively young men taking part in this youth protest. Second, do you know anyone who tried to go cover those demonstrations wearing a beanie?
Wearing a yarmulke.
If you thought it was religion neutral, put on your yarmulke and go with your notebook and try and film them. Just try that. Ask any French Jew what they would feel taking a day trip to one of those banlieues.
Yeah.
Go on, ask them.
Yeah. Well, here
I have asked them. I know what the answer is.
Here I have to side again with Christopher, but with a slightly different reason. That is that, the thrust of the question was, aren't there other social causes to many of these problems? But it may be the case that once people turn to religion in the face of these problems, that religion itself becomes a problem as well. And it is not the case that if somehow tomorrow everyone was to be delivered a car, a Peugeot in the banlieue, and a job, that somehow that appeal would stop. This thing takes on a force of its own.
Yes.
And all the more reason to be worried about it and treat it subtly when it happens.
Islamism, jihadism, is not the product of poverty and unemployment. It is the cause of it. It aims to cause it. The national income of Indonesia was brought down by a full point by 2 or 3 bombs in the full employment economy of Bali.
All right, we have to stop. We have to stop.
That was by design. Okay.
We have to stop at that point. Thank you so much. Very illuminating guests.